everyone, and welcome to Your Music, Your Way, the powerful path of sonic improvisation for accessing innate genius and liberating your unique and precious gifts. I'm here with Matt Fox, who is an amazing human being and a teacher of mine and a teacher of many over the years, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time introducing him in just a moment, but I just wanted to acknowledge you and thank you for being here, Matt.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. I'm glad to be with you.
So the reason that I'm pulling this summit together is because it seems to me that one of the most essential skills that we can possibly learn at this point in time in human history is to be able to navigate the unknown with mastery. When we don't do that, we find ourselves the victims of our circumstances and our past and old stories and strategies that we've developed in another time previous to now. And it can leave us frustrated and confused when we're not in the flow of things. But when we are able to navigate the unknown with mastery, it opens us to our creative spirit and our larger possibilities that are innate to us, but sometimes we forget about. And so enter the possibility of sonic improvisation, to learn how to navigate by creating sounds that open us to these other parts of us. And one of the reasons that I brought Matt on here today, or I asked Matthew Fox to be on this with us today, is because I learned at his university years ago, at the University of Creation Spirituality, what he calls art as meditation, which is a way of bringing the body in to our prayers and bringing the physicality of our natural birthright as human beings on this planet. And so I know that I've learned so many things. My life has been changed in so many ways over the last 18 or so years as a result of this beautiful man here. And I wanted to give him the opportunity to speak to this topic. Matt is an author, a theologian, an activist priest, has been called spirit and conscience into the creation spirituality lineage for over 50 years. His 37 books, lectures, retreats, and innovative education models have ignited an international movement to awaken people to be mystics and prophets, contemplative activists who honor and defend the earth and work for justice, seeking to establish a new pedagogy for learning spirituality that was grounded in an effort to reawaken the West to its own mystical traditions in such figures as Hildegard of Bingen, Meister Eckhart, and the mysticism of Thomas Aquinas, as well as interacting with contemporary scientists who are also mystics. Fox founded the University of Creation Spirituality. His recent projects include Order of the Sacred Earth, Daily Meditations with Matthew Fox, and a certificate program in leadership in the creation spirituality tradition. His most recent book is The Tao of Thomas Aquinas, Fierce Wisdom for Hard Times. So I'm just really delighted to have Matthew Fox with us today. Thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and I'm glad you're creating this series to emphasize the importance of imagination and creativity and music and the rest to provide transformation of both soul and society, because it is the arts that, as you say, ground us and also allow us to bring the future in, as well as to acknowledge the ancestors in the past. So it can all come together with art, which takes us beyond just facts into deeper experiences, and taps into our passion and lights fires that they're so needed today. Fires in the heart.
Why is it so difficult for us to do that?
Why is it so difficult? Oh, that's a $64,000 question. I think there's a tendency in our species to lay back and chill out and sit on a couch. And of course, we live in a consumer capitalist society that wants us to sit on the couch and stuff ourselves with potato chips and to live vicariously and passively. So that's part of it. I think there are many other elements too. There's the fear of something new, the fear of creativity, the fear of going to the edge. And our whole educational system is not developed to encourage our creativity.
Mm.
Look at this whole addiction we have to exams for children and so forth, where the joy and the delight and the imagination is actually sucked out of an educational experience. So education is not the same thing as learning, unfortunately. And I compare education to learning as I do religion to spirituality, and they can drift very far apart. So are we really training our young people to be learners as opposed to being part of this game called education? I think those are all factors. And also religion. I think that religion rarely encourages the spirit of creativity. When it does, in great minds like Thomas Aquinas or Hildegard of Bingen or Meister Eckhart, then you really have this incredible explosion. But these mystics, they get sat on, they get forgotten, and then religion becomes an end in itself, a series of rules rather than a fire, like the Holy Spirit is figured as fire to awaken the hearts of everybody. Like Thomas Aquinas says, the same spirit that hovered over the creation, the waters at the beginning of creation, hovers over the mind of the artist at work. Well, that's just such a stunning statement of endorsement for creativity, that the same spirit that launches this universe launches our minds. You know, you could
It's
run
literally
that
mind-boggling.
for years. It's mind-boggling, and it would reinvent religion overnight if we really took it to heart.
Mm-hmm. It could it could reignite us to it's fascinating to ponder that same energy is possible in the now, that now is the possible birthplace of who knows.
Exactly. Well, Meister Eckhart says it. He says everything that happened in the past and everything that's going to happen in the future is happening now in the depths of the human soul. And today's physics really supports that, I think, because the past is past, but it's with us. Just that you can look at a star and it may have died 100 million years ago, but we're seeing it. It's part of us now. And the future isn't here yet, and yet it's all set up by what is here now, including human imagination. So it's quite amazing when you get into the cosmology of creativity. And that's pretty easy today to do, given the new creation story from science, that the universe is constantly birthing. It's birthing a new star every 15 seconds. And a star is a really big thing. Our star, the sun, holds 1 million Earths. So there's one of these things being born every 15 seconds. Are you kidding me? You know, we're living in a universe of incredible creativity. And so, of course, humans tapping into our creativity is why we're here. Is one of the great signs of hope, what humans can do. Unfortunately, we often use our creativity to build more weapons and tear down more rainforests and all the rest. So we have to guide our creativity. We have to have a sense of wisdom and what matters and what's sustainable and what doesn't matter. And a lot of our, again, I think a lot of our economic ideologies banish the whole sense of values that is about what art can really be, as a celebration of life, as a healing device, and as an awakening device. And this is why we talk of art as meditation as the way of the prophets. The great prophets were all great poets. And the prophetic imagination is awakened to stand up to injustice and to create new forms of living. So we can be about all these things. Obviously, the climate crisis facing us today is a prime example that we have to dig in and reinvent the way we live on the earth.
It's one of the things that I love about your approach is you use that word reinvent a lot, and reinventing education and reinventing work and reinventing ritual. And one of the experiences that I've had from learning from you at UCS was about the Cosmic Mass, which is a ritual that you created in the early 90s to combine creation spirituality with rave in England at the time, and to bring a new form that came out from two different things. You integrated it in, and that kind of reminds me of the four paths that you talk about, the via positiva and the negativa, and how we learn from both of those experiences and then put those things together into a via creativa kind of thing. Could you talk about that a little bit and help people who may not be familiar with your work to make sense of that process?
Sure. We did a Cosmic Mass a year ago at the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto. And about 500 people showed up of many traditions, including Buddhists and monk robes and so forth. And it was really very, very powerful. Many people said it was a high point of the whole 10-day conference for them. So the need for ritual is so important today, and to bring peoples together from various traditions, because that's the time we're living in when we're mixing with so many other traditions and none. Atheists have shown up and been excited by what transpires during the Cosmic Mass. But the Cosmic Mass follows those four paths, the first path being that of joy, the via positiva. And to me, this is really the starting point for our mystical lives, the experience of awe and wonder and the joy that is triggered by that, and the sense of gratitude. Then the via negativa is, on the one hand, the experience of silence. It's meditation in that sense, but it's also, of course, the grief and suffering that we undergo. But all that is part of life, and it too gets integrated with the joy. And then comes via creativa, the path of giving birth, of creativity. And that really is the bringing together of the via positiva and negativa. And then is the via transformativa, because that gives us a direction for creativity. That's the path of justice and compassion. There you get the values to steer our creativity, because creativity is not for the ego, it's not for fame, not for money, it's not for power, and it's certainly not for destroying the earth and other people. So we need these guidelines, these parameters, and the path of justice and compassion gives us that. And then you bring creativity into the work of justice making. And again, that's what prophets do, whether it was Gandhi filling the jails and marching to the sea, or whether it was King filling the jails, or whether it was Mandela and so forth. So the work of the prophet is to gather all that energy of joy, of suffering, and of creativity and imagination to make better things happen.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to hear you talk about the power of, when you talk about art as meditation, and when you talked about the Cosmic Mass, one of the things that I've heard you say several times is about the power of the music, what the music does, and the power of a particular beat that attracts, that gets people engaged and gets them in their bodies, and they can get into something that may approach, kind of transcending, getting underneath the lizard brain and our different parts of our thinking minds into our more direct experience parts of ourselves. I'd love to hear what you might have to say about that.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's ancient practice that tribes dance together and sing together, and in that way do ceremony and ritual and healing together. And this goes way, way back. I think it probably precedes language, our capacity to beat sticks and make drums and so forth. And so you find this way of praying in all the indigenous tribes of the world. And it's a way of bringing people together. And of course, the teachings, the Native American teaching, is that the drum is the heartbeat of the universe, heartbeat of the universe. So once again, it's psyche and cosmos coming together. It's cosmos and body coming together because, of course, rhythm and beat are very bodily. They bring us down to the first chakra, down to the earth again. And that's terribly important, especially in our day when so much education and so much religion has us up in our heads. And the fact is we have to get into the lower chakras, first to be energized, but also to be connected to the earth again, and to find where our real power is, including our third chakra, our power of outrage, moral outrage, to tap into that energy and not run from it, not sit on our anger, but to steer it in healthy directions, which is again what people like King and Gandhi did. Is also what people like Isaiah did, and Jesus too, is to admit the anger that's there and to see how to steer it into useful ways, so it doesn't just end up creating more violence and more separation between people. But again, I came of my age, if you will, came of age in the 60s. So you had the civil rights movement and you had the anti-Vietnam movement. And in both, music played a tremendous role. The civil rights movement came out of the church, and the black church. And of course, that church is very committed to the music that grew, for example, from the slaves and how they were protesting and also finding hope, digging deep into their souls in a very, very opprobrious situation to find reasons for living and to find hope. And of course, the movement to jazz and all the rest did that too. And then the songs, "We Shall Overcome" and so forth, by which people marched and created unity in the midst of fierce opposition. The same is true in the Vietnam War. I mean, you can't really write the history without mentioning Bob Dylan or Joan Baez or Peter, Paul, and Mary, these people who brought these folk songs that were songs to get people to gather and to invest their passion for justice and anger at injustice into something that became communal and therefore effective.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions that I have is how to integrate the individual, the individual soul with some sort of a transfer into a collective, and your the way you talk about one river, many wells sort of reminds me of that kind of image that if we connect in with ourselves deeply enough, with our own authentic who I am, then I tap into something that makes it possible for me to connect naturally with the rest of things in a way that I'm making my own unique contribution, and it harmonizes with the rest of things.
Right, where the I and the we come together. And again, this is natural for art, not just music, but poetry and theater and the rest, that we come together sharing common stories and even the storytelling. And of course, there's a lot of that in music too. So, and we go through these four paths together. They're communal, yet they're deeply personal. And that's true of so much wisdom. It's not private. It's radically communal. But you do have to taste it yourself. You have to taste the ashes of the via negativa. You have to taste the joy of the via positiva to bring that to the table where others are also drinking from the same fountains, if you will. And that's what an artist does. An artist carries the burden of the people. It helps to translate it in, and there might even be novels that that lift people up, or that inspire people, or that challenge people, or that at least tell the truth, so that we're not wallowing in self-doubt or in collective amnesia, in denial, which many political powers would like us to do, just to be sit passively and be in denial. Say, for example, about climate change. Pretty stunning how many politicians are living in a world of denial about climate change when seas are rising and glaciers are melting and summers are setting records for their heat, and a whole continent has been burning. And we talk about a canary in a mine. Well, this is a continent in a mine. And you actually have so-called political leaders whose only leadership is denial of reality. So, that's where the artist comes in. That's where the prophet comes in, to speak the truth. And maybe then, if we can get the truth out, maybe there's a chance that we can get our imaginations going to create alternative ways of surviving and living.
This is one of the questions that sort of the activist in me always wants to ask, because it's like there is information out there, and there are people who are telling the truth, but somehow it doesn't reach, somehow it doesn't land. And so as a musician, one of my questions is there some way that we can find common language enough, or build, I don't know what it is. It's like the question ultimately is, how do we get from where we are now to where we'd like to be? And my hypothesis is that that music may be one way to help build bridges, so that when we do share truth, there's fertile soil for it to land in. It seems like we're so bifurcated these days that everything is just tribal, and just because this person said it, this person knows it must be wrong. And so, it's like, how can we massage the edges of our fear or disconnect, or the fabric of society, in such a way that we can begin to find commonality enough so that we can really learn and get more creative with each other.
Well, that's where the via negativa also is important, the silence. That if we can learn silence, which precedes music and is present within music, the space between the notes, but if we can spend some time with the silence, that ceases our projection, which is really what's going on, projection onto others, and the inability to listen. And of course, that another element of the via negativa is the suffering. And that common suffering can wake people up. Take, for example, the coronavirus that we're living through. That, people may share different political beliefs or what have you, but when someone is sick. And hopefully that brings out the capacity of compassion and empathy in human beings. And that gets us moving. And then if you translate that to the bigger scene, the suffering of Mother Earth, the disappearance of entire species, beautiful beings like elephants and tigers and whales and rainforests, and the rest that are in jeopardy, saying nothing of our own species, that too, hopefully, could trigger our capacities for empathy or compassion. And of course, this is what brings all religions together. As the Dalai Lama says, we can do away with our religion, but we can't do away with compassion. Compassion is my religion. Well, that's what Buddhism says. And Jesus said something very similar in Luke 6 when he says, be you compassionate, like your Creator in heaven is compassionate. And he got that from his Jewish heritage, which says that compassion is the secret name for God. And in the Quran, Allah, the compassionate one, is the most common adjective for Allah by far. This in the Quran. So there's a consensus here that is our capacity for compassion, and that includes empathy and action, which we share. And we have to get out of the way. Like I say, that's why the silence is important. And to cease projecting and to cease living in these small worlds, these small silos of our, as you say, our tribalism, because we're facing something very great as a species. Today it's coronavirus, but bigger is the disappearance of the earth as we know it. And this is profound in terms of its potential for migration, for example. Millions of people will have to leave our biggest cities that are on seacoasts and so forth. And of course, what it means for drought, agriculture, floods, hurricanes, all that is on the horizon. And it's truly inhuman to wallow in I'd call it a religion of denial, because it's an ideology, it's a faith belief, though this really isn't happening, it's really not important. We have to move out of those idolatries and face the truth and face it together. And that, I think, is what can awaken our species. And we need an awakening, a really big one today.
Yes, yes.
Or several.
Yes, several. And if there was ever a time to come together.
Exactly. Exactly. This is it. Because we may not have another chance as a species. I mean, this is what science is saying. We have less than 10 years left to truly change our direction as a species. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that can help us is the photograph that was taken when Jupiter 1 left our solar system and looked back on its journey from the Earth. And you can get this online, it's on YouTube. And there's just there are a lot of specks of light. And one of them is an arrow that the scientists put in, say, Earth.
We're here.
It gives us perspective that our Earth is such a tiny dot, and yet it works for us, and it's utterly beautiful, and so far it's utterly unique in what we found. Maybe there are others, but we haven't found them yet. Mm-hmm. But the point is that this is what we got in common. It just melts the differences of ideology, of religions, of economic systems. Those things just pale in comparison. And we could be putting all the energy and science and money that we're putting into weapons, which is $56,000 a second. Well, that's what we're doing now as a species. $56,000 a second on weapons and military. We could be putting that into this common effort to defend our little dot of a planet. To defend it against ourselves, because we're the ones destroying it. So reinventing how we live here, this can be done. Solar energy, wind energy, we have the basic ingredients for this, but we don't seem to have yet a common political will. And that, again, is where artists can help to awaken us, to cut through the noise and bring us to this common task. And that is what creates community. In fact, that's the very meaning. Etymologically, the word community in Latin means communio, a common task, to share a common task. Or the common task is survival and sustainability. It's not just about our species, it's about all the other species we share the planet with, including the soil and the water and the air and the forests and all the creatures. So this is the task. Are we up to it, and can we get around to it sooner rather than too late? That's what we face, and artists have to step forward and do their prophetic work.
Well, and I've heard you say many times that we're all artists and that we're all prophets. So we don't have to wait for some other artist out there to do it. It's like it's on
exactly. It's on us, absolutely, of course. The way we raise the children, that's an art form. The way we live our lives and decorate our houses and grow food and the food we choose to eat and so forth. It's a choice, and therefore it's art. It's creativity at work, and it is, in Aquinas' terms, the Holy Spirit at work, working through us. And we have to travel spiritually very light today. I talk about, instead of basilicas on our back, backpacks on our back, spiritually speaking, because we have to be very mobile and resilient. And you can go deep through spiritual practices that are portable and that are democratic. It's not for the elite. I don't think we need lots and lots of monasteries today. I think we need everybody participating in the capacity to quiet the reptilian brain, so meditation does, so that we can face silence alone and together, but also to generate this creativity that we've been talking about, and to make the music in all its expressions that can charge the human soul again.
Beautiful. I really appreciate your time today. And if you have anything else that you'd like to say about the Tao of Aquinas, I love that title. You can say something about this and any other offerings that you'd like to make to our listeners.
Well, in my second to last book, my book called Naming the Unnameable, 89 Wonderful and Useful Names for God, including the Unnameable God, I cite music as a name for God, and I cite Hildegard and Bingen, who says God is music, God is life. And she herself was a genius of a musician in the 12th century, and very, very original in her version of Gregorian chant. So she knows what she's talking about. But just that idea that God is music is I think, kind of an eye-opener or an ear-opener. Mm-hmm. And of course, people have experiences with all kinds of music, including Bach and Mozart and others, who play that out, that people have these deep spiritual experiences playing music, composing music, and listening to music. And each one of those is a work of art, including listening. Sometimes we think the artist is the only one who does the performing, but no, the listeners too. The same is true of painting. To take in a painting is to be creative. And then Aquinas has so much to say about the artist and musician and divinity. He says God is the artist of artists. He says every artist loves what they make. The poet loves her poems. The potter loves his pots. The painter loves her paintings. How can God, who is an artist of everything, hate anything? So this whole idea that there's a relationship of art to artist that we all experience, but that translates profoundly to the relationship of the creator to creation. And that too, I think, brings alive the what can I say? Well, the divinity of creation, that there's pulsating in all creatures an image of the divine. This is the Jewish tradition. The image of God applies to all creatures, not just to the human. And it's the Buddha tradition of the Buddha nature that is part of everything in the universe. And it's the cosmic Christ tradition in Christianity, that the Christ is present wherever there's light. And we now know that every atom in the universe bears light waves, photons. So again, this is an interfaith realization or intuition that everything is beaming with the radiance of the divine. And you can call it another Buddha, another Christ, another image of God. That's really secondary. What's important is that there is a sacredness to our existence, the existence of every being, that we have to recover today, because we've been so utilitarian in our tearing down of Mother Earth and our extracting from Mother Earth, that we've lost the very sense of sacred. One Native American teacher said to me one day, "I know how sacred water is, go without it for 3 days." Right. The sacred is omnipresent, but we can take it for granted so readily if we don't wake up. Yeah.
So true. Yes. So thank you again. And is there anything that you would like to, how can people get in touch with you or connect with you?
Well, they can go to my webpage, matthewfox.org. And there's a lot of stuff cooking there. And I'm glad you mentioned the daily meditations, which are free. They just go on Daily Meditations with Matthew Fox, and they're there. And there's this new program we're doing online, beginning in a month or so, on creation, spirituality, and leadership at the Global Ministries Network, Global Ministries University. But again, all that is mentioned on my webpage and also in the daily meditation
I'm going to check that out, the leadership program.
Yeah.
I'll just say, which since I haven't today, but the whole creation spirituality framework has been profound for me. I grew up Christian, Disciples of Christ was my background, and I went through, like a lot of us, several different iterations along the way of checking out Taoism and Buddhism and other traditions, and Native American, and sort of continue to. But for me, creation spirituality is a framework that is broad enough and deep enough to encapsulate the heart and the essence of all these different traditions. It holds the medicine wheel, it holds the depth, it holds the cosmos. It's a framework that can hold all these different things in a way that I think is so amazing, because it comes from you. It comes from the Western tradition. So I think it's a really super powerful framework for Americans as churches die, and we're looking for something.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and I'm glad that you found that yourself personally. And it does link to our creation. After all our religions go through man, human beings, and creation is something we all have in common. So, if we're going to center religion around creation first, the sacredness of creation, why wouldn't all religions be welcome, first of all, to contribute? And now that we're in this great struggle of the survival of creation as we know it, survival of the earth as we know it, once again, we have to ask, well, what does your tradition bring? Bring it to the table. This isn't a competition. Right. It's all hands on deck, So I think that's where we are historically. And it is special, I think, significant that this tradition comes from the Hebrew Bible, that Jesus himself is from the wisdom tradition, which is nature-based, creation-centered tradition of Israel. But it's bigger than that. It preceded the Hebrew Bible because indigenous people are, in their own way, all telling the story of the sacredness of creation and the nearness of the Creator to all of us, as mirrored in the stars and in creation and so forth. So, yeah, it's a wonderful way, I think, to bring the world religions together today, and with a purpose, with a common action. And respecting the diversity. Why wouldn't we want diverse songs and music and costumes and colors, and just as you have with diverse cultures? You don't have to become one thing, but there are some common elements here. The four paths, I think, are among them, that people can recognize, oh, this is humanity that's being talked about. When you talk about the joy in life, the suffering in life, and the silence, the creativity, and the struggle for justice. I mean, this is the story of our species, I think. And so, yeah, I think there's a kind of scintillation, a kind of gathering increased spirituality, some concepts and language that helps us to listen deeper to ourselves, to our own tradition, to demand more of our own traditions, and to listen to one another in greater depth.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you again.
Thank you, and thanks for the work you're doing, especially around music and art. Go for it.
Here's to whatever may get created from here.
There you go.